Excuse me, we have an app for that. Would you step aside, please?
Sure.
Short.
So am I. So
Have a
cool.
seat, have a stand.
Cool. Okay, that's great.
Count with me. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off! Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I am Reverend Jay Wolin, the minister here at the Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota. I know I've seen many of you at school board meetings. I see some of our members here, but it is our honor to host this meeting. Unitarian Universalism is a non-creedal faith that believes that wisdom can come from multiple sources, especially our experiences in the world. We encourage people to find meaning in ways that are meaningful to them. We have stated values which the foundation is love. Now, one of our principles is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and therefore education is the foundation of a responsible search. Education has always been an important part of our religion. We were one of the first creators of the kindergarten movement and strong supporters of public schooling in this country. We're also the first advocates for women's education and the suffrage movement. And I saw up there, it said, about education and democracy. Education is critical to democracy. We're proud that 2 of the first 5 presidents of this country were Unitarian, the Adams boys. And even Jefferson wrote once in his diary, he thought every person in this country would be a Unitarian by the end of the century. Didn't quite work out that way, but anyways, for these reasons that we are happy and want to encourage and we want to support our schools and the work they do to promote excellence and freedom in public education, which does help democracy as well. Thank you all for being here, and learn, educate, and advocate.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Carol Lerner. I'm a director, Support Our Schools, and I'm also a retired educator and pretty much a full-time activist these days. So today we're going to hear from some of the best generals in this ever-intensifying war on education. About 3 months ago, when executive orders were flying left and right, and the U.S. Department of Education was being dismantled right before our eyes, the leaders of Support Our Schools felt disoriented, depressed, like I'm sure most of you felt. There was no resistance at that point, or very little resistance. But then an idea popped up. Why don't we create an event that will both educate and lead to actions that will, as the title of this event is called, stop the attacks on our public education? And so we are here today to do just that. We have divided today into 2 segments. In the morning, we will hear from some of the most important voices in the war on against the war on education, in both the keynote addresses and a panel discussion, and then a Q&A will follow that. One will be speaking from a national perspective, 2 from a statewide perspective, and 2 from a local perspective. In the afternoon, we will then put to work what we have learned and add some too, and work on developing a plan leading us towards the 2026 school board election here in Sarasota and elsewhere. But here in Sarasota, there'll be 3 seats that will be open. Well, the MAGA attacks right now are broad and encompass just about every issue raised in the Project 2025 playbook. Education, both K-12 and, as we've been seeing, higher education, are very much in the bullseye. But when we talk about education, we're really talking about everything. Like everything relates to a child being able to learn and a family being able to give the nurturing support that children need. So yes, good schools are critical to children and their families' well-being, but so is good health care. So is a healthy environment. So is a decent house to live in. So is a living wage for their parents, and so on. And what does this mean when we are fighting the war on education? It means that we really have to be part of a very broad movement that is being developed right now. We have to be a key part of that. We must remember, and I think we're going to hear more about this later today, that education and democracy are totally entwined. If education goes down the drain, so does our democracy, and vice versa. Right now, I would like to thank key partners who helped to pull today's event together. Foremost, we would like to thank the Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Committee, led by Sharon Howard, who's in the room. Sharon, can you stand up for a minute? Thank you. The Social Justice Committee co-sponsored this event. The UU has been simply wonderful to work with. Thank you, Minister Jay Wallen, who we just heard from, and Catherine Bonner, who's the Director of Programs and Religious Education. Thank you to the UU Tech crew, Klaus Obermeit, if I'm pronouncing it right, Doug Caldwell, and I think there were other people involved. To be honest, I didn't realize that, and I didn't catch their names. I would also like to thank the many organizations and individuals who helped in small ways and large ways to put this together. This includes the Sea Alliance, the Democratic Education Caucus of Minnesota, Voices of Florida, Social Justice Alliance of Florida Suncoast, Church of the Trinity, MCC, Sarasota Public Education Network, Equality Florida, Also Youth, the League of Women's Voters of Education Committee, NAMI, Democratic Women's Club of Sarasota, Project Pride, Florida Policy Institute, and we would especially like to thank Deb Hayes. Deb, where are you? Can you stand up? Oh, she's outside doing the registration. There she is. She was critical in also in getting this off the ground. We have two people I'd also like to recognize. Someone who I think most people in this room know, Shirley Brown. Will you stand up? Shirley is a retired school board member, but certainly not retired from the fight to make sure public education continues. I'd also like to recognize that one of our bloggers that I think a lot of people know in this room, the Dear Bubby blogger, Julie Ferguson, is here. Julie, where are you? There you are. Great. And now you are in for a really special treat. Wendy Rosen, SOS's, she's the director and the director of communications, will present this exciting part of our program.
Thank you. I'm Wendy Rosen, and I'm kind of the newest member of the team. Welcome to our Stop the Attack on Public Schools Forum. In Sarasota and throughout Florida and nationwide, our public schools are facing a crisis in funding and are threatened by political interference. President Franklin Roosevelt said, "Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely." The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education. This morning's presentations are being recorded and will be posted on our website. You don't have to worry about taking copious notes. Just relax, absorb the information, and have a good day. We've got an exciting day planned, and we're going to start off with two great speakers who will give us an overview of the crisis that we face. It's my honor now to introduce our amazing video. A few months ago, we all decided that, you know what, we need a little commercial to share with people, to tell them what we do and how we do it, and our history of scandal and messaging and the successes that we've had. So Lisa, it's my honor to present Lisa Schur, who will introduce our video.
Thank you, Wendy. I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had the honor and privilege of making a presentation at the Network for Public Education. And the topic of our presentation was building a multi-generational coalition. We did this jointly, excuse me, with our friends from the Sea Alliance. So as part of that, we put together this video. I should say we paid to put together this video because none of us have the technology chops for that. But in any case, we wanted this video to let people know who we were, what we do, where we came from, but we also wanted it to serve as a general message to anybody that wants to get involved and thinks that they don't have the chops to do it. So with that, I'd like to introduce our video. They've warned me it may take a couple of seconds to cue it up.
Welcome to Sarasota, Florida, home of the #1 ranked beach in the United States, home of the Ringling Brothers Circus. We are an absolute tropical paradise. That is, if you can turn a blind eye to extremism. You see, Sarasota is also ground zero for anti-public education extremism. Our headlines speak for themselves.
How Sarasota County became Florida's laboratory for far-right extremism.
Water slides and rifles inside Florida's playground for the far right.
How Sarasota became the conspiracy capital of the United States.
There's no better example of how extremism is affecting our community than simply watching our school board meetings. Take a look for yourself. These are not people who are trying to solve problems and unite a community. These are extremists that are intentionally creating chaos with the goal of destroying public education. That's where we came in. Support Our Schools. Talk about David versus Goliath. We, the co-founders of Support Our Schools, were all moms from vastly different backgrounds when we all started to individually pay attention. For lack of a better term, maybe we just woke up. At first, we noticed that we were all sharing the same content on social media, and soon we were collaborating. But what good is being passionately opinionated behind a keyboard if it isn't channeled into real action? With guidance from other pro-education organizations and the addition of an education expert to our board, we started attracting other parents and teachers and students in our community. People from all walks of life started simply showing up.
Louise Machinist. I'm a retired child psychologist.
My name is Mary Holmes, and I'm a veteran ESC teacher of 34 years.
I am Christy Carwad, a teacher and a 41-year resident of Sarasota.
My name is Dr. Theone Suplis.
My name is Dr. Sonia Howman.
My name is Robin Taub Williams.
I am Elizabeth Bornstein.
I'm Richard Stammer.
My name is Mackenzie Valenza.
From 12 years old.
My name is Talila Brand. I'm a middle school student.
To 92 years old.
My name is Rana Bazzini.
Our community did not disappoint. With time, we became a trusted symbol of action and hope, but most of all, we simply became a megaphone for our community. The more we would demand accountability from our school board.
Because accountability feels like an attack when you're not ready to acknowledge how your behavior harms others.
And the more we spoke out against hypocrisy.
People are angry. People are angry at your hypocrisy.
And the more we stood up against corruption.
How corruption, greed, and power has been set loose in this state to destroy public education.
The more we shined a spotlight, the more our community started paying attention, and soon they were asking, what can I do? That's the root of what SOS really is. SOS is simply a guide for the community. We educate the community and amplify their voices, whether that means guiding them to write a letter to the editor of our local papers or helping them understand the rules for public speaking at school board meetings. We are simply the spotlight that helps our community find ways to become involved. Soon, our individual voices created a sea of passionate activism, and we had managed to start a movement.
And a plan, a couple dozen people rallying outside of the Sarasota County School Board tonight.
Our community showed up in droves for rallies, marches, and speakers forums. And our school board meetings, well, those changed too. Community members who swore they would never speak publicly pushed through their fear and started speaking up more and more.
This will be my first school board speech ever.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sally. This is my idea of hell. Public speaking, as you can tell, as I shake all over the place.
As confidence grew, folks shared their speeches online, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and their speeches began to go viral. We certainly didn't understand the importance of virality until we realized that our speeches could reach more people faster. Soon, other pro-public organizations were reaching out to us. Some wanted to learn from us, some wanted to teach us, some wanted to collaborate with us. Working with other groups is an easy way to magnify the message and get others involved. It truly takes a village. When we started to go viral, something important began to happen. The media started paying attention too. They recognized that Sarasota was ground zero for laws like Don't Say Gay, book banning, and other culture war dog whistles. And all of a sudden, our phones didn't stop ringing. And it wasn't just our local media. We were getting calls from CNN, Washington Post, MSNBC, Mother Jones, NPR, Vanity Fair, the list went on. This is an actual photo of the press area of one of our school board meetings. Just look. Crazy, right? This media interest was the springboard we needed. We started to feed the media hand over fist. We recognized that these issues weren't limited to just Sarasota, so we needed to ensure that our message had national reach. We started by introducing the media to the extremists in our community, and let me tell you, we got plenty. Sarasota is the home of convicted criminal and disgraced General Michael Flynn, Truth Social, Rumble, multiple Proud Boys. Yep, that's our own local Proud Boy throwing a white power sign on the streets of Sarasota. Shall I go on? Ann Vandersteel, Charlie Kirk, and none other than election denier Patrick Byrne. But the star of this show is the queen of hypocrisy, Moms for Liberty co-founder Bridget Ziegler. Ziegler has been the driving force in destroying public education, attacking our teachers, our LGBT students, and she was leading the charge in book banning. Bridget is the queen of the culture war dog whistle. Hate and intolerance is her brand. I mean, here she is, in front and center, celebrating her 2022 election night win with not one, but two local Proud Boys. One of them is even flashing a white power sign. This stunt made national news. What more do you need to know about Bridget Ziegler's character than this? And let's not forget the rape allegations and her sex scandal. Despite all of the hurdles in our way, SOS and our community managed to do amazing things. Our rallies educated the public and helped create pushback against the opening of a Charter School USA location. Our work also helped prevent the hiring of a Vermilion education consultant with ties to Hillsdale College. Most importantly, despite being up against a political machine, in 2024, SOS helped shine a disinfecting light on our school board, and instead of choosing corruption, our community elected two moderate candidates who are committed to saving public education. Along the way, SOS inadvertently built a family. These strangers that showed up to speak began to build bonds and relationships. And y'all, activists aren't built like everyone else. They approach every aspect of their lives with the same passion and commitment, and they make amazing friends. Anyone who cares about public education can build what we built. Use the current parental outrage sweeping our country as fuel to organize a movement in your community. Our cheat sheet is easy. Number 1, be the spotlight in your community. Guide and support those who are ready to advocate. Number 2, stay politically neutral, because being pro-public education should never be a Democratic agenda or a Republican agenda. It should be a human agenda. Number 3, refuse to take the culture war bait. It's a distraction. They're showing you the shiny watch while they pickpocket you. Don't fall for it. Number 4, work smart instead of hard. Connect with your local media and let them carry your voice. Number 5, collaborate with other organizations who value public education. Build coalitions. You are stronger when you stand together. While the leaders of our organization have changed with time, our mission remains the same: to engage, unite, advocate, and tirelessly work against the defunding and dismantling of our public schools. We aim to ensure every child can access a high-quality, equitable, and inclusive learning environment. While we undoubtedly feel like David fighting Goliath, let's not forget David did win.
That's great. That was a real cooperative effort to put that together. So let's give another round of applause for everyone who worked on that. Okay, so now we're moving into the kind of meat, I would say, of today's event. I'm going to be introducing the keynote speaker, Jennifer Berkshire. But let me reflect a tiny bit on how and what Jennifer has meant for me, even though I really just met her for the first time in person last night. When I was first introduced to charter schools in the late 1990s, I was living in New Jersey. I was an educator then. I didn't know what to think. I had remembered that a union leader, Albert Schenker, who was head of the New York Teachers Union and president of the AFT, he was the one who first posed it. So I thought, okay, it can't be bad, right? And then I heard the claims that these schools were part of education reform, that's a good word, right? That they were innovative, sounds good, and that they would allow marginalized children to succeed. It sounded good to me, but at the same time, I kind of had this niggling feeling that there was something wrong, that I kind of smelled a rat. Now, it's not to say that all charter schools are bad, but what they have unfortunately turned into now, it's almost all corporate charter schools that are on the scene now. But then, like, getting back to my little evolution, then Katrina hit in New Orleans in 2005, and everybody remembers the devastation there. But one of the first things they did was to close down public education, and every single public school was turned into a charter school, and most of them were these corporate for-profit charter schools. Then I really knew there was something wrong with this so-called education reform. But it wasn't until I picked up a book in 2020 called A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door that I fully understood what was going on in privatization. Now, in 2020, I had been living in Sarasota for about 6 years, and I became very, very concerned about what was going on in Florida. And I really delved into privatization. But I still didn't really understand it until I read Jennifer's book. Now let me give a quote from a very well-known person in the real education reform movement, Diane Ravitch. Probably a lot of people have heard her name. She's the head of the Network for Public Education, what Lisa mentioned that we were at their conference and presented last month. So what she said about it, she says, quote, "It is an important book that pulls together all the threads of privatization movement and shows that their agenda is not to improve education or to advance equity, but to destroy public education." And that's what I found about Jennifer's book. It really pulled everything together, history, philosophy behind the movement, and philosophy behind what real education should be. So I would very highly recommend it. She also has recently read a book that's totally outstanding that I just finished reading on basically the war on education. The Education Wars, a Citizen's Guide and Defense program. Let me just tell you a little bit background about Jennifer before she comes up. She grew up in the Midwest, and while she has long since been transplanted to the East Coast, she will forever be a Heartlander at heart. Her interest in, and some would say obsession with, public education began in 2006 when she took a job editing the statewide newspaper for the American Federation of Teachers in Massachusetts. Jennifer writes about the intersection of education and politics for the Nation, the New Republic, the Baffler, and the New York Times, and other publications. She is the author of 3 books, More Worlds to Negotiate with John Dunlap, and The Art of Problem Solving. As I mentioned, A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door, The Dismantling of Public Education and the Future of Schools, with Jack, I forgot his last name, but she can tell, and Education Wars, A Citizen's Guide and Defense manual, which I mentioned also. She teaches in the Boston College Prison Education Program. She's a licensed public school teacher, and she lives in Gloucester, Massachusetts. So it's our pleasure to have this nationally renowned person to share with us her thoughts. I hear her laughing, but she is. In the education movement, she very much is. So Jennifer, take it away.
Well, I don't think it's really fair to make me talk after that amazing video, but I will do my best. And so I thought that I would start out today just by telling you a little bit about my Florida story. First slide, please. So these are my parents. This is my father, Tom, and my mother, Charlotte. And they grew up in Pensacola, Florida, Gulf Breeze to be precise. Next slide, please. My father goes on to attend the University of Florida, and here he is with a group of students who are protesting the refusal of a local establishment to serve black people. My father went to jail for that. Next slide, please. And here's my mother. She attended Florida State, and she was an activist in her own way. If some of you may recall a time when women on campus were not allowed to wear pants. So my mother was one of these, and she and her peers felt very strongly that this was unfair. And also when they got to college, the orientation consisted of the house mother passing around a rose and reminding them that they were delicate flowers and that they should really remain that way. And can you skip ahead to the next slide? Keep going. So I know we heard in the video that Siesta Key has the best beaches in the world. I would beg to differ. It's the sugar white sands of Pensacola, Florida. And the reason that I'm sharing this background with you is that in many ways, I think the story of my own family is representative of the tensions and conflict that run through so much of Florida's history and its politics. Has anyone in the room ever been to Pensacola Beach? So my aunt designed this sign. Yes. And she was an absolutely lovely woman, brilliant, cultured, talented, but alas, like the great state of Florida, she just kept moving further and further to the right. And Carol mentioned in her introduction that I formerly worked at, I edited a statewide newspaper for the American Federation of Teachers in Massachusetts. And I have a vivid memory of getting together with my aunt the year before I had just gotten the job, and we're down here visiting, and I tell her, you know, oh, I just got a new job. I'm really excited about it. I tell her what it is, and she picks up her fork, and she starts stabbing at the table, and she says, the teachers' unions deserve to be killed. And I said, okay, well, tell me how you really feel, Aunt Pat. So there we were. And I think that in many ways, like the two strands of my family story are really representative of the story of Florida, both as a state, but also locally. So on the one hand, you know, my father's family had come from the north. His father was a scientist. He was a government-funded scientist at the University of Illinois. He played a role in the invention of the first computer. When you see those pictures where the computers are as big as a room, that was him. And then he came down to work for the Navy, and his job was to come up with intelligence tests to test whether people in the Navy, did they have the chops to land the plane on the aircraft carrier. And so that was one strand of the family. One of my aunts is the reason why there are dunes still in Pensacola. She was one of the first environmental activists in Florida. And then there was the other side of the family, my mother's family. And let's just say that they they had an older view of the world, one in which there were fairly rigid hierarchies of race and gender. And you didn't have to go back far to realize that for them, the Civil War had basically never ended. So why are we talking about this today? Because it turns out that right here in Sarasota, there's a similar story that's been playing out. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of old Sarasota. Does anybody remember when it looked like this? It was a sleepy seaside town. But what's so interesting is that if you go back to the 1960s, it went through an earlier iteration of the culture wars that have been burning here so hotly. And some of you may know this story, but I'm going to share a little bit with you now because I think in many ways it's stunning. You really feel like you're living in a time warp. So what happens? Just like today, Sarasota was growing rapidly. And you had a lot of Northerners coming down, people like my father's family. And yet at the same time, you have a moment of intense political change. 1960, Republicans sweep everything, every single office, right? The local level, the county level, and the school board. And they decide they're going to get right to work fixing the schools. Well, what do they mean by fixing the schools? Well, think about all of the acronyms that you're hearing about right now. Anybody want to name some? DEI, critical race theory, social and emotional learning, gender ideology. Well, the folks who were newly elected in Sarasota, they had a different concern on their hands, and that concern was communism. And they saw it everywhere. And so what did they do? Well, they start looking at the books in the schools, right? That the kids are being indoctrinated. It's got to be the books. They start looking at the leadership, right? The superintendent. He seems pretty sketchy. What are they worried about? Well, for one thing, he's a Unitarian. In fact, there were lots of Unitarians at the time, and when we heard that ambitious forecast that, by a certain date, Unitarians would run the world, well, back in the 1960s, if you were a conservative activist, somebody who was on the right, you looked at the growing authority and influence of the Unitarians, and you smelled something, and that thing was a conspiracy. And so this drags on for 6 long years. And they're going school by school. They're looking at the teachers. They're looking for signs that the teachers are communists, also possibly gay. And they force out one superintendent. They get in another one, but it turns out like he seems squishy too. He's also a Unitarian, and he plays the jazz trumpet. Right? What could be more left-wing than that? And so things come to a head in 1966. And what's amazing, we saw that shot in the video of the level of media attention that was focused on Sarasota. We had the same thing happen in 1966, the 1966 version of that. So there's a big meeting in town. The PTA has convened it. They're going to be issuing a report. Is there actually communist infiltration in the schools? Is there any evidence of a vast communist conspiracy? NBC News is there. It's packed. 200 people. And the PTA releases the results of their findings. And what did they find? No. There was not a conspiracy, a communist conspiracy in the schools. And in fact, the real danger was coming from the right. And that was who the teachers and the students felt menaced by. And that was what those were the folks who were increasingly making the community feel like it was under attack. And then what was amazing, and it would be great to know about the organizing that happened back then, because I bet it looked a lot like what we saw in that video, is that after that 1966 meeting, things get very quiet. Kids go back to school, and it starts to feel like all of this is in the distance. Like, before long, the school board meeting quiets down, people get back to the hard work of educating kids. And this, presented a big question. Why did this happen? How was it that we go through 6 long years of just the most intense battles, where you have people literally sneaking into the bathrooms at the high school, listening just to hear anything that sounds like communism, to things being back to normal? Well, I thought this was quite interesting. It turned out that as loud as those folks were on the right, their volume did not reflect their numbers. There were only, it turned out, about 25 or 30 real extreme activists on the right, and they were the ones leading the charge. And once it was revealed that they did not speak for the larger community or the schools, it was as though somebody put a pin in a balloon and we were done, at least for now. Next slide, and I'm going to have you skip ahead a little bit. We'll skip the John Birch Society for now. Keep going. Oh, so I know I'm standing up here sounding like I'm an expert on Sarasota in the 1960s, but I actually just cribbed it all from this excellent historian. He's now retired. I happened, if you were paying attention during the video, when they put up there all the different national media outlets that were interested in Sarasota. One of those was a friend of mine who wrote a piece for Vanity Fair. And in that piece, there just happened to be a link to this historical study. And I highly recommend it, because you really will feel like you are living in a time warp that's just destined to repeat every several decades. Next slide, please. Keep going. Keep going. One more. Keep going. And I'm going to have you go back. Keep going. Okay. Now you're probably wondering, why is there a picture of lasagna? We are not eating lasagna for lunch. So I live up north of Boston, but partly because I do feel a deep connection to Florida, I really try to keep up on your various political scandals. It is not easy, right? Like, a few days go by and I have missed 4 new ones. And so lately, I have been trying to keep up with the scandal about the Hope Foundation and the $10 million of missing Medicaid funding, and maybe over lunch, somebody who understands Florida politics better than I do can just sit me down, walk me through it, draw some little boxes and explain what happened. But as I read up on it, I came across just an amazing quote from your First Lady, Casey DeSantis. And she was saying, government can't fix anything. Government is the problem. And that if you're somebody who's, say, living in poverty, what you really need is the church. And if you don't have enough to eat, you should call the church, and they'll do it. They'll make the lasagna and bring it to you. And I thought, wow, this is such an interesting way to view the world. And it really reminded me of another great education visionary. And I believe I needed to go back one slide. Some of you remember this person. This is Betsy DeVos. She had many thoughts about the schools, and maybe a decade ago, she was invited to be the commencement speaker at Ave Maria University down near Naples. And at the time, I will admit it, I had a little bit of a Betsy DeVos obsession. I went to Michigan, I drove all over the state just trying to figure out who she was and what she was up to. So I actually read the transcript of her commencement speech. And it was fascinating because she also shares the view that Casey DeSantis has, that government is the problem, and that our insistence on having things like social programs, things like Medicaid, and a minimum wage, and regulations, that has essentially eliminated the role of the church in our lives. And if we didn't have all of those things, then people would have no choice but to rely on one another and to call the church and ask for them to prepare a lasagna. She did not mention the lasagna, but if she had read Casey DeSantis's quote, she would have been nodding very enthusiastically. And see, the thing is, what was very clear with Betsy DeVos and what's a little less clear with Casey DeSantis is that when they rail against the government, they're railing against the schools. They're railing against public education. And DeVos would elaborate on some of this, in some of her other talks. She would say things, that basically that the school had replaced the family, and that basically what it did was it groomed kids to think of themselves as agents of the state, right? That they were basically little minions of the government, and that what we needed to do was to basically get rid of all of that, move the responsibility of educating kids back to the churches and the family. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you about this today is that it is so easy to get lost in the weeds of all this stuff. Just try keeping up for a single week with all of the directives that are coming out from the Trump White House or the Department of Education about what is or isn't banned right now in our schools. Wait till you hear Sue, our esteemed school board member from the Keys. Wait till she tries to walk you through school funding. You will know exactly what I'm talking about. This is weedy stuff. But at the end of the day, it's not really. Because what we're fighting about right now is what kind of role the government should play in making the country more equal. So when my dad was at that protest at the University of Florida, or when things blew up in Sarasota, one of the reasons that local conservative activists were so mad in Sarasota was that they wanted the school board to reject the directive from the federal government that they had to integrate the schools. Think about it. We're just 10 years out from Brown versus Board of Education, and suddenly integration is the law of the land. The government is saying, here is the role we're going to play in making your schools more equal and your community unequal, and you don't have a choice. We're going to make you do it. And so now we fast forward to the present, and if you back up a little bit from all the stuff that's happening, all the craziness, this is essentially what it is about. That we're at a moment of extreme backlash where the people who are now running the show are saying that actually we don't think the government should play any role in making us more equal. In fact, we're going to root out any effort that the government plays in that capacity. And so the next time you're trying to figure out what is their obsession with DEI, why would, for example, why would our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, why would he be spending all of his time telling the schools that the Pentagon runs? These are K-12 schools, but they're also, universities that are connected to the military. Why is he telling them that these are all of the books that they have to ban? And the real reason is that if you back up a little bit and you look at those schools, the Department of Defense schools date back even before Brown versus Board of Education. World War II has wrapped up, and Harry Truman is looking around to where most of the military bases are. They're in the South. The schools in the South are deeply segregated, and he says, this isn't going to work. if we're going to have an integrated military, one military, the schools have to be integrated too. You know what? Let's set up our own schools and let's make integration by race and class and rank fundamental to the way that the schools are run. And you think about how at odds that is with the vision that is on offer now, that basically schools are being told that anything they do that tries to make education more equal along lines of race and income and the equivalent of rank is now off the table. Can you go back a few in the slides, please? Keep going. One more. All right, we need to talk about vouchers. We have no choice because if you think about the clash, the fundamental clash today as being over equality, and then essentially it's a retread of what we already lived through in the mid-century and before that, then it's vouchers look a little different because they were the original hack, as a Silicon Valley person might describe them, to get around the government's edict that integration is going to be the law of the land. And so in the lead up to Brown versus Board in 1954 and in the aftermath, you see states throughout the former Confederacy going to unbelievable lengths to try to figure out how to get the white kids out of the public schools. Some went as far as actually just shutting their public education systems down. Other places set up voucher systems, right? They say basically, you know what? We don't want the kids going to school together. That is not a vision that we believe in because at the end of the day, we don't believe that kids of different races are equal. And so instead, what we're going to do is we're going to pay for the parents of the white kids to send their kids to private religious schools. And these programs had different names. They had, some of them were called vouchers, some of them were tax credit scholarships. They hadn't yet come up with the concept that we're hearing about today, the education savings account. But if they had thought about it, they would have. And so what's interesting, those of you who have been following Florida education politics for quite a while, and I'm looking over here at Sue. Sue, raise your hand. So Sue and I have only met in person twice, but we have been avid correspondents for a long time, and we would go back and forth about Florida education politics along the lines of, can you believe what they've come up with now? So one of the interesting things about Florida was that, you know, vouchers really they have a terrible rap, right? Because they have this association with segregation that they cannot get rid of. And a number of years ago, it was maybe in 2021, one of the big conservative business groups, the Club for Growth, commissioned a huge survey, and they asked people about their opinions. You know, what do you think about school choice? And they tried all these different names for it, and their conclusion was, we can't. You know, people are so opposed to the idea of vouchers because they associate it with racial segregation. We can't talk about vouchers anymore, we're going to lose. And they concluded that really the same held true for school choice, that the only way forward was to talk about education freedom. And so what was interesting in Florida was that you really saw Florida take the lead in trying to rebrand vouchers using the language of civil rights. And so in Florida, the idea was that this was going to be the vehicle for liberating kids of color, and particularly low-income kids of color, and not just those kids, but really anyone for whom the current system didn't offer enough opportunity. So it could be kids with special needs. It could be kids who were being bullied because they were gay and lesbian. And so some of us kind of watched, and I would say like it was a combination of amazement and shock, and watching as this program just got bigger and bigger, and how it was that they were able to rebrand this concept of vouchers that by definition, because they go to private and home schools that are separate from civil rights, right? The kids who attend those schools don't actually have civil rights, and yet they were able to use the language of civil rights. And so Florida was really kind of leading the charge in this way. And then a few years ago, something really interesting happens. It's the aftermath of the pandemic, and the folks who are the loudest and also deepest pocketed advocates for vouchers in this country, that would be folks like Betsy DeVos, Jeff Yass, who's the richest man in Pennsylvania. They see the pandemic and its aftermath as a huge opportunity for them. And so they decide they're going to do something they've never done before. They're going to make vouchers a litmus test issue for the Republican Party. And this means that from here on out, if you're going to call yourself a Republican, you have to support school vouchers. It doesn't matter if you're in a rural community where there aren't any private schools. This is what you have to do, and if you do not, if you refuse to support vouchers, they're going to use national and state funds to primary you and take you out. And so we saw this happen in state after state after state. And so there's something else that happens at this time, and that is that the folks who are really leading the charge, the kind of political visionaries, decide that they're going to lean hard into the culture wars in order to drum up support for vouchers. That they are, okay, so forget all that stuff that you heard in Florida about civil rights. Forget all that stuff you heard about these private schools being a refuge for kids who are gay and lesbian or trans. No more. Right now, we're going to wrap up vouchers in the mantle of parents' rights, but we're also going to tell a story about public schools. This is when you start to hear about teachers as groomers. You start to hear about drag queen story hour, right? I don't need to go through the list because you live here in Sarasota, you lived it. But they decide to really lean into the culture wars. And so we've heard, so we've got this, we're going to make vouchers a Republican litmus test. We're going to lean into the culture wars. And there's one more key element of this. We're going to make vouchers universal. So what does this mean? This means that now you can be eligible to have your state government pick up the tab for your private school tuition, no matter how wealthy you are. And I just want you to think for a minute about how different this is from the sales pitch that you, especially in Florida, have heard for so long. Next slide, please. And like in every state that has now adopted universal vouchers, what we're very, very quickly seeing is that the sales pitch for the program, which is always, it doesn't matter what state you're in, they are always sold as an escape valve for low income and kids of color who are being failed by their local public schools. And what we see in state after state, and there are now many of these states, including many that you probably don't even know have adopted universal school vouchers, like Iowa, for example. The new ones are Tennessee and Texas. And what we see in all of these states is that, one, these programs are enormously expensive, but not for the reason that you might think. Because I think we all imagine, well, okay, now you, as a parent, you have the option to send your kid to a private school. And so So we're having a rush of kids out of public schools into private schools using these vouchers. That is not what's happening at all. And we know that because we can go state by state and we can see, wow, this program is a whole lot more expensive than they said it was going to be. In Florida, you're up to almost $4 billion. In Ohio, we're talking about $1 billion. And yet in Ohio, for example, private school enrollment has not gone up. Wait, that's really weird. How did the program keep getting more and more expensive, and yet the same number of kids is attending private schools? It's because the government just offered a coupon to all the parents who already send their kids to public schools. So suddenly this means that we're in a situation where we're having to fight for scarce resources. One of the things that I've been pointing out in my writing is that a lot of these states, including Florida, at the same time they enacted vouchers and made more and more people eligible for them, including their wealthiest residents, they also cut taxes, again, on their wealthiest residents and on corporations. And so that means that even before we started to head into choppy economic waters, a lot of these states were looking at revenue forecasts that were pretty bleak. It turns out that when you cut taxes on everybody at the top of the ladder, that means you have less income coming in. And when you also offer to pay the tuition for those same people's kids, you have more revenue going out. And so suddenly everybody is looking at kind of bleak economic forecasts. Now, I make a point of reading all of the terrible, terrible books that all these folks write. So if you came with me to my house in Gloucester, Massachusetts, we walked into my little office, you would see Betsy DeVos's book, Hostages No More. You would see Pete Hegseth's book, Battle for the American Mind, about the 100-year-long conspiracy to indoctrinate kids through the public schools. You would even see my latest acquisition, Kevin Roberts, head of the Heritage Foundation, Dawn's Early Light, also about the 100-year-long conspiracy to indoctrinate kids through the public schools. But it was through another one of these books, one called The Parent Revolution by a high-profile voucher lobbyist. His name is Corey DeAngelis. He was outed earlier this year as having had a previous life as a gay porn star. I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to go there. We are in a place of faith. You can look it up on your own later. So Corey, what was amazing to me was that he laid out the whole, what they might call a theory of change, right? That if you do this thing, then this thing will happen, and this thing will happen, and this thing will happen. Because I keep wondering, like, what can the possible justification be for picking up the tab for wealthy people who were already sending their kids to private schools? If any of you have conservative relatives, aren't they always barking at you about entitlements and how, like we can't just give money to people? But that's exactly what these programs do. So this didn't really make any sense to me. And so, I keep reading along, and there it is. And he says, basically, the reason that this is so important is for two reasons. One is that now that we've leaned into the culture war, we can no longer make the civil rights case for vouchers because basically that's all banned. But two, we need those influential parents, the ones who have the most, to go to the mat to protect these programs when they come under fire, which they will inevitably do. Because it turns out when you're in the state of Florida and your voucher program costs $4 billion and you're looking ahead to a budget deficit that, we've got an expert in the House, what are we looking at? How much? $2 billion next year, even bigger in the following years. Something is going to have to give. Now, one of the things when Sue and I would correspond, we both like to pay attention to what the folks, the visionaries who are driving these policies like to say. So I was obsessed with Betsy DeVos. Sue, I don't think I'm going to give anything away here. Little bit of a Jeb Bush obsession. But we were very interested in the group that oversees Florida's vouchers. It's a group called Step Up for Students. And what's interesting is that they're, outside of Florida, they're very low profile. Very few people have heard of them. They have a budget that's larger than the American Cancer Society, which gives you a sense of the amount of money that we're talking about. And so they, they would often write, their leaders would write things laying out their vision, and they would do a podcast, and I'm pretty sure Sue and I were among the few listeners to it. But what was fascinating was that I always want to know, gee, this seems like a really weird idea. Where do you all see all of this going? So we see part of that here, right? That we now see that Florida is essentially subsidizing wealthy parents, but also the schools that they attend. And so we can look around and we can see tons of examples, not just here, but in states everywhere that have these programs, where the school very rationally concludes, well, they were already paying $18,000. Now the state's picking up the tab. Let's raise tuition, right? So we're seeing a world in which the haves are being given more. Well, what about everybody else? What is on offer for them? Next slide, please. Oh, I think they fell asleep. So if you go to the Step Up for Students website, you will see something that they're very proud of, and that is basically an Amazon-like marketplace. And the idea is that we are all consumers, that just the way that we buy any product, that is how we are going to buy education. And I think a lot of us, when we hear something like, a voucher or a tax credit, scholarship, we immediately envision the previous image, right? We see the kids are going to the private religious school, and we usually imagine the high-end school. So like the Massachusetts analogy would be Phillips Andover Academy, right? Or I teach at inside a medium security prison in Massachusetts. The next town over from where the prison is home to the Groton School. Tuition is $70,000 a year. That's what we think of. But the vision of the folks who've really been driving the bus in Florida is that for everybody else, there's going to be a radically deregulated system where you just buy stuff. And whatever you buy is going to be the thing that's called school. That we're not just going to unbundle the education product from public education, right? They often use the analogy of the cable company. Free yourself from the tyranny and chains of Comcast and stream everything instead. They want to go beyond that, and so that it's not just that you pick the school, it's that you, the parent, buy stuff on the internet, and whatever you buy is called school. So if you go, next slide please. If you go to this portal, you will see page after page after page of stuff that you can buy. And I picked a couple. This one was called Raising Real Men. And so you can order these swords. They've got books for parents. It's there's always somebody who's got a hustle and has moved into the education space. And so you click through, and it's page after page after page. Most of it's stuff that you can use if you're homeschooling your kids. And I couldn't help but wonder, how are you supposed to know if any of this is any good? Because the only information that you can find, there's a link to the website, and then they have basically the information about their return policy. And so it's very much like the experience of being on Amazon, and I'm sure you've all had this experience, where you're trying to buy something. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you know this, but in New England, there's a unique kind of bowling called candlepin bowling. The balls are smaller than what they call, very disparagingly, I think, big ball bowling. And so I've recently taken this up, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to order my own bowling shoes. So I go to Amazon, millions of them. I have all I can go by is the reviews, which, as many of you know, are now like just produced by AI bots. So I'm lost in this world, and they arrived. They were terrible. I sent them back, but when I see this vision that people are just going to click on stuff and call it school, and they're going to be on their own, it makes me feel really sad. Next slide, please. Keep going. Keep going. There is a terrific education advocate in Arizona, which really, Florida, I think, in many ways has been the canary in the coal mine. I need a tropical equivalent of that. Arizona has been ground zero for what universal vouchers look like. And so the program has turned out to be enormously expensive, so expensive that Arizona is not just cutting education funding, they're having to cut all kinds of spending, including investment in water infrastructure. Can you imagine something that you would need more desperately in Arizona, where I think the average temperature is now about 115 degrees? And Beth Lewis is a terrific education advocate, and I think she laid it out really bluntly here. The defining issue here is, do you care about other people's kids or not? And our shift towards school choice and away from what conservatives would very disparagingly call government schools is to incentivize you to only think about your own kids and not ever think about what's happening to the other kids. But I think when you think about this education marketplace that I just showed you, it's also a vision where nobody has to care about your kid either, right? The state no longer cares about your kid either. Your kid has been moved off the books. As Casey DeSantis explained, the government can't do anything. That's why we're going to do an education marketplace. And so before you know it, everyone is just isolated on their own, buying stuff on the internet and calling it school. And you can only imagine the kind of world that's going to be ushered in as a result. If we're picking up the tab for the people who already have the most and subsidizing their ability to go to the best private schools while encouraging everyone else to essentially eat the bugs, we know how it's going to end. Next slide. Sue, how am I doing on time? I have 0 time? Oh, okay, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to go, can you just go down a few more slides? Keep going. Sue's going to talk about this. I started out talking about my parents. This is my sister. This is my sister Gretchen. She retired from 30 years of teaching in a small rural school in southern Illinois, and I asked her, what are you going to do now? And she says, I want to advocate for public education. And so that's what she does. She goes to all those hands-off rallies, and the night before I came, she texted me late at night, and she said, I'm watching the town hall in North Carolina with Chris Murphy and Maxwell Frost from Orlando. Are you watching it? And I was like, no, Gretchen, it's 9:30. I'm in bed. I'm an older person. And she said, they are doing the best job of explaining to people why the assault on public education is so grave and why it's so urgent that we stand up to defend it. So she came away from that feeling empowered, a little bit better about the world. Next, she was going to go off to somewhere in Missouri because they were going to do their town hall there. I think she's gotten a little carried away. But what she's found in her activism is that people all over the country are waking up, and they are more and more connecting the kinds of politics that are playing out before us in all kinds of domains with the attacks on our public schools. And they're seeing the vision that's on offer, and they don't like it at all. And that, I think, is why The work being done by Save Our Schools is so important, and I'm so appreciative that all of you are part of it. Thank you.
So I think now you understand why we invited Jennifer. I mean, she's amazing and funny as hell. So it was great. Thank you so much. Now we're going on to our second featured speaker. If you ask anyone that's involved in advocacy and education in any way, like who's the go-to person in Florida? Who knows about privatizations, the ins and outs, who's behind it? Who knows about legislation? Who knows about little details that you might not even think of? It is Sue Woltanski. I think Jennifer gave kind of an introduction to her, so I don't think I have to say too much, but I am going to go into her bio a bit. I've been an avid reader of her blog, Accountabaloney. I was first intrigued by the title, like what the heck is this? Everyone says you have to read it. And I thought, what? Okay. And then I read one time, just one blog, and I was like, won over. It's amazing stuff that she reports on for all our benefit. And I got to meet her when we were in Ohio. We keep referencing the Network for Public Education. It's really a very important force in this whole effort. They really pull everyone together from all over the nation. So it was a pleasure to meet her in person then. And we said we have to have her on this amazing group of women. I think it all is. And it seems like women are doing a lot of this work. But there's some men here, so great, let's grab them and we'll put them all to work. In any event, let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Sue Woltanski. She is first and foremost a public education advocate. She's a retired pediatrician and mother of 2 public school graduates. She has been following education policy in Florida for more than a decade. And as I mentioned, she writes the blog Accountabaloney. And as she puts it, it focuses on the damaging effects of high-stakes testing and Florida's relentless privatization policy agenda, which of course goes completely together. The high-stake testing is the way they try and tell people that everyone's failing in public education, and then they defund it further to prove that it's a failure. She was initially elected unopposed to the Monroe County School Board, that's in the Keys, in 2018, and reelected in August 2022. And are you up for election? 26. She's one of only 5 school board candidates statewide to defeat a DeSantis-endorsed opponent that night. So Sarasota has that story also, so we share a lot in common. So take it away.
First of all, I'm going to say I can't believe I have to follow that video and Jennifer Berkshire. I've been a fan of hers for so long. Also, I'm a little afraid because I like to walk while I talk, and so this is very scary. I'm going to hold on to both sides. So I'm Sue Woltanski. I think they just told you about me. I'll tell you the story of how we came up with this Accountabaloney. It was Jon Stewart's final monologue. They said, how do you come up with all these ideas? And he said, well, it's not hard. He goes, we just find bullshit and BS. We just find BS And he goes, and it's not really hard to find it because there's a big mountain of it out there. And I said to my friend, there's baloney. The accountability system is full of baloney. There's a big mountain of it, so it's Accountabaloney. That's how that came up. So my husband and I moved to Florida full-time with our 2 kids in 2008 so that they could live next door to their grandmother, who was a snowbird. This is my son's first day at kindergarten. This is them getting ready to go to school. And this was, they're both graduated now. Oh wait, before I say any of that, I have to say, yes, I am on the Monroe County School Board, but nothing I say today should be construed to come from the Monroe County School Board. I am speaking just for myself. This year, by the time my daughter was in 3rd grade, my son was in kindergarten, I was on the school advisory committee, I was volunteering at the schools, and we were deep in the budget cuts that came from Rick Scott and the Great Recession. So they had cut the lovely all-day gifted program that my daughter was supposed to be doing in 3rd grade, and then she also had to, then I also got to experience what high-stakes testing was, because it really affects the classroom in 3rd grade especially. So this is really the year where I started trying to figure out, how does the budget work, how did all these cuts happen, and then how did we get to a place where this testing was eating the classroom. You can go to the next slide. So by 2014, I was the expert on public education in the Florida Keys, and I was asked to come speak at a thing in Key West, and I love this picture because, you know, it was Key West. So I ran into the Grim Reaper. And this was before I knew how to do PowerPoint, so I just had like my speech on a poster board thing. And so the Grim Reaper definitely knew that privatization of public schools was a death knell, and he agreed to take his photo with me. By 2014, a lot of what Jennifer was saying was happening in Florida. John Kirtley and Betsy DeVos were both billionaires, both working in Florida through Florida Federation for Children and American Federation for Children. And the way they originally got vouchers passed and charter school laws passed was by primarying the Democrats. They would give money to the Democrats that supported vouchers, and they would find Democrats that to run against those that opposed them. But this was the topic of my talk that day, was how to privatize public schools, and these were the steps I had. You would defund them either by not keeping up with inflation or have unfunded mandates, and then you would test all the kids to label them, the schools, as failing, and then you would blame the teachers. At that time, all our teachers were being evaluated through VAM scores, which was some kind of crazy formula about learning gains, and then you would offer escape through school choice, charters, or vouchers, or virtual school. But what I want you to know is it wasn't new in 2014. So next slide. So Jeb Bush's A+ plan in 1999 included testing all students, grading schools, and rating teachers based on test scores, and offering vouchers for escape. Now, a lot of people don't remember that last part because it got tied up in the courts. Shirley remembers. It got tied up in the courts for a long time, but it has always been the goal with the high-stakes testing to label the schools so the kids would leave them. The other thing that is part of Jeb's legacy is this idea that we should measure outcomes, not inputs. So Florida has been running on this model of getting the greatest return for your investment, and that means the highest test scores for the lowest tax dollars. And then we can go on. remember nothing else. This goes along with what Jennifer was saying at the end of her talk. The goal now is not to privatize education. It's not to turn your schoolhouse into a private school. It is to privatize the responsibility for education. They want everybody will get their $8,000 or whatever it is, each family, and they'll do what they need to do with it, and it'll be none of your responsibility. They want to remove the community responsibility for education entirely because they want to, one, eliminate taxes, and two, allow the free market to build something beautiful. And you know, how are they going to do it? The same way they got vouchers, one bite at a time. Next slide. So I'm going to just go through sort of how my 2014 idea of privatization has been playing out in Florida over time, but also just this year. And I want you to know that very disparate bills are all tied together. Bills that have to do with technology in the classrooms, reading instruction, charter schools, they're all connected and I know that sounds like a conspiracy, but that's because it is. So one of the things people always say, what happened to the Florida lottery funds? They are I guess I could go. They're primarily diverted to Bright Futures scholarships, and those, if you get a certain SAT score and a certain GPA, and you do a certain amount of community service hours, you can get a scholarship to a Florida's tuition paid for a Florida university. Those requirements have been moved up and up and up, so there's very few low-income or children of color, English language learners that receive those vouchers, the scholarships for higher ed, but they're almost entirely funded by the lower income population. So it's again a sort of those scholarships are really funded by people who are trying to work their way out of poverty through the lottery. You probably are all aware that Sarasota schools are facing millions in cuts because Florida's budget right now is targeting the performance funding for advanced placement and IB and career and technical programs and dual enrollment. And this actually flies in the face of JEB's measure outcomes, not inputs. You know, this is money that was given to schools that were successful, so it should have, that's why it was put in place, to encourage those advanced courses in schools. Let's go to the next slide. So part two is to label them as failing, and that's what's done with the school grade system. There's a bill right now that is designed, so Jeb Bush has put a school grade system of A to F, and he did that because it would be easy for people to understand. Not because, I mean, he could have picked excellent, above average, average, needs work, you know, low performing, but he picked A to F. And so there's a group of lawmakers right now in a bill moving through that is going to change the calculation of the school grade formula so that it matches what you would get in a classroom. They're saying you would need 90% of the points to get an A. Well, the only school in Sarasota that gets that is Pineview. And the only schools right now that get 90% of their points are ones that have selective admission. So that is going, if that moves through, it will label essentially all of our schools as failing. And when I spoke in front of the House committee that was talking about it, I asked them if they knew how many failing private schools we have, and the answer is none. We've never had a failing private school in Florida because we don't grade them at all. There's also a bill going through that allows these corporate charter chains that have called Schools of Hope to co-locate with public schools that have some empty classrooms. the public school has to pay for school lunch and security and all of that, but these schools can come in if the school is labeled as low performing, which means the lowest 10th percentile in either math or reading. And you don't have to be that good at math to know there's always going to be a lowest 10th percentile. So it's not a definition of failing, it's just the lowest 10th percentile. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. Oh yeah, I guess I should have said the culture wars were a way of telling people that the schools were not just failing, but now they're dangerous to your children, and definitely that is, the teachers are being blamed for that. They are being blamed for, well, you guys know, indoctrination, turning your kids gay, giving them a book that is, has a 1-paragraph description of sex and therefore is pornography. If you've seen the news, Brevard County just had the first teacher fired for using the preferred name of a student. My understanding is that student had been using that name for 4 years, but their parents didn't sign the permission form. The teacher called the child the name they had been using for 4 years and now was not renewed. We can move to the next slide. And then the last thing is to offer escape. There are an insane number of bills right now that are talking about how vacant public schools or underutilized public schools must be used. And primarily it's to turn them into charters, but it also is to turn them into affordable housing, or, it's parks. They have a whole health departments, and those are all good ways to repurpose a school that's underutilized, but those decisions, in my opinion, need to come from the community, and not, Tallahassee doesn't need to be micromanaging them. But there's a concern, especially in South Florida, that the public schools are hoarding the land, and so that the charter schools and the private schools don't have a place to build their schools. We can move on. So this is a picture of the Republican Party writing the budget this year. It's all, there is a huge budget battle right now. They're about, I heard at the last thing, they're $3 billion apart, the House and the Senate, and the House has now accused of the Senate of patronizing them. They're not arguing about how much they should fund public schools or whether or not they should fund advanced placement or dual enrollment. They're cutting that in half, both of them. That's not part of the argument. The argument is how much they should cut taxes. So they're defunding schools at the same time. The argument is like where their $5 billion tax cut should come from. This is an unusual year because school boards are speaking out. And, right, I heard the finally, that's a good one. But actually, even in Tallahassee, we were told by lobbyists that, you need to speak out and about the cuts to the funding. And we can go on, let's see. I don't know. Okay, so this is the Senate, this is where I'm gonna fall off. The proposed Senate budget right now for education slashes more than $290 million in funding for advanced placement, dual enrollment, and other academically challenging coursework in public schools. The House budget slashes that funding for career and technical as well. They say that they've got it like a shell game. They say they're cutting that from the schools who earned that, but they're going to give it to everybody. The total funding and the funding formula is going to increase by $984.5 million, but more than $700 million of that is going to vouchers. Currently, there are 3.2 million students funded through that formula, and 86% attend public schools, as district managed and charter schools are included in that part of the funding formula, but 14% use publicly funded vouchers for private school, yet over 70% of the increased FEF funding this year is being allocated to vouchers. And the House budget is worse. We can move on. So this is my former senator. He's, you know, you should think of this all of the time. People should be outraged because this is outrageous. Let's move on. So I was talking to Jennifer earlier about how I talk to people and they always leave me saying, "Oh, I'm so depressed," because. So I thought, oh, what are some opportunities? There are some opportunities, I think. One is that the governor and the legislators are fighting each other, so it is possible. Alex Andrade, who is involved with the Hope Florida investigation, is the guy who is carrying the voucher bill to be able to, or the charter school bill to be able to convert public schools more easily to charter schools. So that could get vetoed, so I guess that's an opportunity. The other thing is that these cuts to the advanced programming are very unpopular, and when those programs get cut, or when there's cuts at the public school level, the blame has got to go back to the legislature. We need to make them feel pain, because the voucher lobby showers them with money. We don't have anyone showering them with money. We need to make them feel pain for the cuts that they're doing to public school. And this is maybe a rallying cry. The budgets are not keeping up with inflation. In Monroe County, if we get the Senate budget, it'll be a 1.5% increase, which is below inflation. We'll be in a $2.6 million hole for our little county. It's 10 times that for here in Sarasota. And it's going to get worse because the projected forecasts show that there's a $2 billion general revenue in 26-27 with a predicted 40,000 new vouchers at that time. We need to make the lawmakers understand how the vouchers are affecting the formula. Here, we'll go on. So I know you can't read this, but this is a report that estimates predicted enrollment over the next 5 years. And the yellow there is public schools. It's predicting what the newspaper is calling a dramatic decline, an exodus of children from public schools. Over 5 years, they show a decline predicted of 66,000 students. That's 2% of the student population. There's not a mass exodus from public schools, but there is going to be an increase of family empowerment vouchers of 240,000 over those 5 years. And just in a nutshell, the reason those are, the biggest portions of that are that we used to have, we right now have tax credit scholarships. They're funded through tax credits, and we have family empowerment scholarships that are funded through the funding formula. And when they went to universal vouchers and allowed vouchers to go to homeschoolers, that's called the PEP program, they only funded those with the tax credit scholarships, vouchers. Every time someone takes a PEP scholarship to homeschool their child, to build a playground in their backyard, to buy them a bicycle, that pushes a child out of the tax credit pile and puts them into the funding formula. So next year there's going to be 37,000 students predicted to be pushed out of the tax credit and put into the funding formula. So that's where our big giant number came from this year. It's we're taking kids who were usually formerly funded one way, and now we're funding them directly through the formula that impacts public schools. We can go on. I always like to remind people that it is the paramount duty of the Florida legislature to make adequate provision for the education of all children residing within its borders, and that should be made by a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of public schools. I also like to remind people that the number one choice that almost every parent has is a safe, high-quality public school in their neighborhood. And let's move on. We need to keep reminding them of that. The most important thing is to be informed and to share what you know with other people. These are some of the sources that I highly recommend. Jeff Solichek is a Tampa Bay Times reporter, and every weekday morning he puts a grade book list of all the articles of what's going on in education that day or the previous day. He also has a list on there of what education bills are going to be heard during legislation, that day during legislative session. There are bill trackers through the Florida House and the Florida Senate, and you can set it to tell you when that bill that you're interested in is going to be up in front of a committee. That's when you contact the committee members and tell them what you think of their bill. You can watch meetings. This is how I learned about Florida education policy. You can watch meetings on the Florida channel, and you can watch them recorded, so you can go back and see what people said, and you can search by your own lawmaker. You can see what your lawmaker said about some of these bills. If you're concerned about book bans and censorship, and everyone should be, you should be following the Florida Freedom to Read Project. If you're concerned about LGBTQ rights, and everyone should be, you should be following Equality Florida. And then I also want to make people aware of Florida's Kaleidoscope PTA. The Florida PTA has a virtual statewide PTA program or club for families with children who are LGBTQ, and it helps those parents sort their parental rights, and that's a great resource. And then, of course, you should follow Accountabaloney and Have You Heard, and support ourschools.com. Let's see. We can move to the last. So this is my son's Mother's Day project. Way back, he said, I had different hair then, but the same wrinkles. And he said that I was writing a super popular education blog called Accountabaloney, and it might actually change Florida. So let's try to make that happen. Thank you so much.
Okay, can I ask our four panelists to come up and take a seat on the dais? We're going to have this panel now, and we're going to pose some questions to our panelists, and then there will be a Q&A session afterwards. So just bear that in mind, if you would hold your questions till the end. You've already heard bios for Jennifer and Sue. So I'd like to next introduce Norin Dollard. You want to hold up your hand there, Norin? Hello. Norin is PhD is a senior policy analyst focused on early learning and education, and Kids Count director with the Florida Policy Institute. Her organization is a tremendous resource for anybody that's interested in what's going on here in Florida. Norin has more than 30 years of health services research and evaluation experience in Florida and New York in the area of behavioral health needs of children and families across child serving systems. She has served as Florida's Kids Count director since 2015 and holds a doctorate in education from the University of South Florida and a master's in public administration from the University at Albany State University of New York. I'd also next like to introduce Zaire Kikahuna Samdi. Zaire is a Sarasota native who spent her youth advocating for marginalized communities, students, and families in and outside of Sarasota County. A consistent leader in various organizations like the NAACP, Sarasota Youth Association, and Voices of Florida, Zaire is committed to and will always stand with, protect, and fight for her community. Zaire is now the Sarasota Organizing Coordinator for the Sea Alliance. So please welcome all of our panelists. Okay, Norin, you're going to be my first victim. We know that in September of 2024, Florida Policy Institute projected significant deficits in future budgets, projections that are probably on the low side, as we understand your long-term budget estimates were prepared prior to the 2024 presidential election. Have your projections changed significantly post the 2024 election, and have you factored in vouchers and federal budget cuts in your projections? If you want to give, present this as a brief overview of where things stand now, that'd be great.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks for having me. We actually started at Florida Policy Institute. We started this journey in 2022, and we wrote a report called The Hidden Voucher Expansion. And at that time, we were spending $1.3 billion on vouchers already. We, of course, had been hearing rumors about universal expansion of vouchers to all families, regardless of income. And voila, January 2023, indeed, the session, that's what was proposed, and it moved rapidly through the legislature, and by March of that year was signed by the governor. At that time, we did a study with the Education Law Center in New Jersey, who is also a wonderful resource on public funding for public schools as one of their projects. And our study estimated that vouchers would cost the state $4 billion, 2023. Within a year, and they budgeted, they only budgeted $2 billion. So we said it's $4 billion. We kept saying it, we kept saying it, we kept saying it. Everybody said, no, not gonna happen. So they budgeted $2 billion. Last year it was $3.2 billion. In the current school year, it's in the current school year, it's $3.2 billion, and the Family Empowerment Scholarship, the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship, is another $1.1 billion. So we hit the $4 billion mark. So Sue talks about this tattoo she's gonna get. I told you so. I'm very sorry to say that we told them so. What is happening now, the two House proposals, and Sue referenced these, the House is $3.8 and $4 billion in the Senate, and that's not including the Florida tax credit. So that would take us to $5 billion for next school year. And there's a lot of, the legislature, as noted, is in a complete, what's the technical word? Tizzy. Yes, that was the word I was going to say. A kerfuffle, because for starters, they're $4 billion apart, the House and Senate, on their budget. That hasn't happened in 10 fiscal years. They're pretty far apart. The other, y'all live here, you know we love our tax cuts, we love our tax holidays, and so both the House and the Senate, while they don't agree on the magnitude of those tax cuts, are both working diligently to make that happen. And as we know, we're very heavily dependent on taxes, sales tax revenue, to fund our government. You know, in education, it's local property tax, and Floridians love public schools. And what was it, 10 different districts last year voted to say, yes, please tax me for my schools, do it. there was only one that it did not succeed. So there's a disconnect there between our legislature and what we feel as the taxpayers. Anyway, so they're trying to cut taxes, which Jennifer alluded to earlier, not alluded to, she said it. We're trying to cut taxes, we're trying to increase vouchers, and when my understanding is parents are calling, they're really, really angry around the cuts to AP, IB, to the career and technical education that their kids have been benefiting from. My son is an IB graduate, started at UF, second semester, sophomore. It's a real benefit to our community, to our families. Anyways, so when they're calling, legislators are saying, we're not cutting anything. And I'm a bit of a budget wonk. I get lost in the numbers, it is true. But the budget, the House actually is decreasing the budget for education overall, higher ed, period K through 12. The Senate is a very little tiny bit more, but Sue noted 1.5% increase in the per pupil spending. On the Senate side is less than 1%. In February, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says 2.4% is the rate of inflation, so we're not even keeping up with that. When you look at the increases, the per pupils spending is increasing 1.5%. The voucher line is increasing 25% in both the House and the Senate budgets. Teacher pay is increasing, new teacher pay, very small. So I would respectfully ask, where is it that we are not cutting things when the House, the bill analysis of the AP cuts says we're gonna only have half of the kids that we currently educate in those programs are going to be able to benefit from them going forward. So we are in a very weird situation now with the legislature, and it is an opportunity. So I'm going to be quiet because I'm sure I'm over my 3 minutes, and I'll have some more later.
Thank you, Norin. For those of you who've been taking the step of writing to your legislators, I'd be interested maybe after the meeting talking to you. I, of course, have written to all of my legislators, and I've struck up a friendship with one of the staffers of Fiona McFarland, and we've gone back and forth about the numbers and him assuring me that everything's going to be fine. So I sent his numbers to Sue because I knew that she would know kaboom, and I think probably within 5 minutes she wrote back and poked holes into everything that he had said, which I of course sent to him. I offered to give her credit. She said, no, you can pretend it's you that has a clue what's going on. Oddly enough, he hasn't written back to me anymore. Imagine that. I'd like to pose this next question to Jennifer. Jennifer, over the next 6 months and then the next couple of years, what do you think will be the major obstacles to public education?
Well, I am more of a glass half full person, and we won't get into what the glass is full of. But I agree with Sue. I see this as a moment of amazing opportunity. And while I was here, I got a text from my sister. There is a May Day protest in Carbondale on Thursday evening. It's a workers' rights protest, and one of the things they mentioned is public schools over profit. She's already making her sign. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had as public education advocates is that we tend to live in our own world, and that there hasn't been enough overlap between the organizing that we're doing and other groups. And what I try to do as someone who writes and podcasts about education, I'm always urging people, you can't just be focused on education policy. You also have to be focused on what's happening with taxes, with what's the larger vision that's playing out. And I think where this is encouraging for us is that it's at the very local level
at the level of the school, that people are going to experience a lot of this stuff that maybe at the national level feels very far removed. And I'll just give you one example. You can take virtually any policy that Donald Trump is advocating for right now, and it's when it gets to public education that it tanks in the polls. Immigration, his numbers are falling, but he still has quite a lot of support, particularly among the people who voted for him. What does it look like when we talk about sending ICE into schools? Drops down to 16%, right? So I think we really need to lean in to the fact that the vision that's on offer is deeply unpopular, and that we can help people make the connections between what they care about, whether it's workers' rights or the disinvestment from their future, privatization, et cetera. So I'm very glass half full.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Please.
And being really specific here is we need to think of this as a tax on our children, whether it's hunger, whether it's healthcare, it's schools, they are attacking our children. And so I would urge you to try to connect those dots every opportunity. And if you have a local May Day event, I know we do, say this is about all of our kids and their complete whole lives. So thanks.
Thank you, Norin. Certainly what we've seen at Support Our Schools is, when we started this organization 4 years ago, it was hard to get people to show up at school board meetings because it was a scary space at that point in time. But, as more and more people are personally impacted by what's going on, whether it be parents of kids with IEPs, 504s, civil rights issues, or, advanced placement kids, it is starting to really personally touch people, and it's getting people like you to show up. So I think that's very much, I see very many opportunities in the future as more and more people are impacted to get our voices out there and maybe make some changes. My next question is for you, Sue. As both a school board member and an education advocate who has a really strong grasp on the status of public education in Florida in particular, can you talk about how student enrollment declines, budget cuts, impending budget deficits now and in the future actually affect school districts? What should school districts and education advocates be saying and doing right now? You can put your personal spin on that.
I think the most important thing is people need to be celebrating the successes of public schools. If you go to Tallahassee, every single bill is how to fix our failing school system, and our school system's not failing. So again, what they offer in place of our public school system is a system with no accountability and basically unaccredited schools. So celebrating the good things that are going on in the schools is really important. And I asked the lawmakers when I met with them this last year that if they were going to vote for a bill, that they would say, my public schools are really good, but this might make them even better. Because I said it's all negative about public schools, and then there's some sort of magic that, if parents choose, they'll find another fit. But, parents are they're choosing public schools. At the school, I don't remember the second half of the question. At the school board level, how the budgets and all of that.
What should school districts and education advocates be saying and doing right now? What's the messaging?
Yeah, I think people, first of all, I would encourage the way change happens is through relationships. So you need to strike up relationships with people on your school boards, and you need to be in the room with your lawmakers during the summer and not just be attacking them, but be letting them know how much you care about your public schools. You can support public schools in a very positive way, and they need to hear that because they're not hearing that up in Tallahassee. In Tallahassee, they're trying to fix failure, so they do need to hear from people on that. And those relationships take a long time. And only recently, I started going to the Capitol, I don't know, 2013 maybe. And now when I go through the Capitol, I'm like, hey, oh, hi, and I've always been against what they're proposing, for the most part. So you can develop relationships, you can be a trusted person. You need to know, you should be reaching out to your school board and finding out how will this budget, there are budget meetings this summer, but I would recommend meeting with your school board people before you go to those meetings and asking them, like, how can you help get a budget that will really focus on children? Because most school board members, I don't know, school board members want to be student-focused.
Sometimes drag kicking and screaming, but yes. Very timely that you're talking about legislation. Our next question is for Zaire. And Zaire, it works with the Sea Alliance, and I believe, was it last week, they took 150 young people up
to Youth Power in the Capitol. Yes, we were there from April 14th to April 16th. We got to meet, we got to meet with a bunch of legislators who sat inside of a couple committee hearings on Senate bills that were affecting the funding from public schools being slowly pushed towards funding charter schools and using their spaces and utilities. And then one member of our team had also led the meetings of meeting with representatives on a bill that would further book banning, already more than what it is in Florida. So it was a learning experience for a lot of people. Majority of the group that was with us, it was their first time, and we provided them resources and tools. And by the end of the trip, they felt like they had been fully equipped, and they went into it thinking it was a big, scary process and came out of it feeling educated and relieved and felt proud.
Fantastic. That wasn't your actual question, but thank you for, we at Supporter Schools feel very, very strongly about building multi-generational coalitions, and you cannot find a better partner than the Sea Alliance with which to align yourself. And I can't say enough great things. Xander Morose will be here this afternoon for table topics, and we're going to talk about a project that the Sea Alliance is working on with respect to the rest of this year and next year in the school board election. So we'll talk about that later. But Zaire, back to you. As a young person working in public education advocacy, how do you go about getting young people involved in advocating for public education?
Good morning again. So we start by connecting the attacks that are happening on public education into real pathways for young organizers to fight back locally, and that starts with school boards. And we focus on school board election and school board advocacy because it's one of the few places where young organizers can step in and they can take the lead and they can see those real, winnable, and tangible changes to our local school board. We also gain and maintain their trust by not just having them show up to our events and to our space, but also engaging them in the real decision-making process, campaign planning, setting strategy, and leading the work. And this is also just tying into what you mentioned about midterms and our terms. That's one of our projects that we will be launching in May. And this will be just an expansion of that very strategy on a statewide level, and it'll also allow us to move past one-time wins and into more of a long-term commitment for us.
Thank you. My next question is for you, Sue, and you can get as much or hopefully as little into the weeds as possible in this to make it understandable for the rest of us. We know there are a lot of moving parts in a school district's budget. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of how vouchers are funded and how this affects the budgets of local school districts?
Yeah, so per pupil funding comes from a state funding formula that is called the Florida Education Finance Program, too weedy, FEFP. And that funding formula is designed to equitably fund students throughout the state of Florida. Designed maybe in the 80s or 90s. And what it does is each school district predicts, has a certain number of students, and then they say what the needs of that student are. And then any child who is like in second grade, an English language learner with special needs would get funded at the same weight as any other child in the state of Florida, regardless of what county they live in. To fund that formula, it's also pretty equitable. They, depending on the socioeconomics of the school district, the state picks up a larger or smaller amount of the budget. So so I think Sarasota and Monroe are both in the same situation. We're called a 90% county. When they decide how much per pupil funding total this district's going to get, we generate 90% of that through our property taxes in order to get the final 10% from the state. But in districts with a lower property tax base, it might be 50-50, and that they're picking up 50%. And so it is equitable, it is fair. It's not good because there's not enough money in the pot, but the pot was designed to be distributed appropriately. So we'll just start with that. And it's funny that it's it's been a model as an equitable funding system. There's two ways that the vouchers affect it. One is that within that count of students, voucher students are now still in there, and they get the same per pupil funding, which is actually they get the average per pupil funding of a school student in that district. So if you have a school district that has 25% of your students are special needs and none of your voucher students are special needs, your average funding is higher, and so they will get more money for that. And so some of the money for kids who have extra needs goes to voucher students whether they need them or not. The other part of that is that the funding formula is designed on a per pupil basis, and then these buckets for like transportation, things that the school district provides, that also goes, school safety is another one.
Is this the categoricals?
Yeah, they're categoricals. And so they are funded based on the population of the school district. There's funding formulas that are complicated and the costs of things in a district. But because the vouchers students don't get provided any of that, they don't have to have the same school safety things, they don't need to provide transportation, but the amount they get comes from the bottom of the budget, where it's the total funds divided by the number of students. A portion of all of that money that was meant for transportation, school safety, whatever, goes out of your district with the vouchers.
Okay, thank you, Sue. We're running tight on time here, so I'm going to just ask one final question, which I'm going to address to all of the panelists. And that is, what do you think is effective messaging for grabbing people's attention and getting them involved in advocating on behalf of public education? Zaire, do you want to go first?
I think for us, or for a lot of people, effective messaging starts with keeping it real. There are attacks on public education, and we draw that urgency into action. We show young people, again, where exactly they can step in and take that change. Also, another tool that we use is social media. We meet our audience where they're at. A lot of young people are on social media. We like to keep things quick, clear, and concise as well, in a way that allows for people who aren't pros in this area or who aren't experts can still come and learn and observe and be able to take that information and soak it in rather than just being lost in the wind. That can be very intimidating. And so when we provide those tools to people, it's more likely that they'll be engaged, that they'll understand our messaging, and that they'll continue to stay involved.
Absolutely. And, you know, as the elders, if you will, when we work with the Sea Alliance, it is a two-way street. We learn, probably in reality, 10 times as much as we teach. We tend to have sometimes some background in some of the technical issues surrounding the issues, but we have learned so much, quite honestly, about social media and getting people's attention from the Sea Alliance. Norin?
Yeah, I would say, yep, keep it real, but also keep it local. Whenever possible, make that personal connection with them. I know at Florida Policy, I hope we can be a resource to you. We always try to provide local level data, so you can go and say, this is the AP cuts in Sarasota School District, or DeSoto, or whatever. But just keep it very real or very local. Yes, keep it real. But it's not just our observation, but when you ask folks around the country what has made them successful, they say keep it local.
Thank you. Sue?
I wish I knew what that thing was, but I will tell you that Jeb Bush has a summit every year, and multiple times in that summit they have their marketing. They've done test marketing, so all of their messages are tested. And I remember watching one time, and one of the reasons they went away from school choice was because to those market groups it seemed like chaos, that families would have to choose all of those things. So I like to bring back some of their messaging. And then the other thing that I said it before, people are choosing public schools, and what they want is a safe, high quality public school in their neighborhood like they had when they were growing up.
I don't know whether it was Diane Ravitch or somebody else at the last Network for Public Education conference that said, it's not really, school choice is not about the parents and the students choosing the school. School choice is about the schools choosing the student. And that's what happens when we start getting into, some of the charter schools and clearly the private schools. They choose because there's no accountability. The students don't have any civil rights whatsoever. So just remember that.
The other thing, when you talk about keeping it local, so in the Keys, we cater to tourists, and our kids not to our children. We only have a couple of pediatricians and 120 miles, and you can buy we don't even have Kmart anymore. We don't have Walmart, we don't have Target. We buy birthday presents for parties if you get the invitation ahead of time on Amazon, otherwise it's at the dollar store. So I remind families that if we were to privatize our public school system, we're not getting a big fancy private school to come in and do it. We're going to get the dollar store of private schools to come to serve our kids.
I like that example.
There was a great line in the outstanding video about how important it is to keep messaging nonpartisan, and I know that's really challenging right now, and I'll be the first to admit, I love to get out there and mix it up, but one thing that makes public education really different is that it does have the potential to bring people together across party lines. We heard about those communities in Florida that voted to raise their own taxes. Well, a significant number of them were communities that also voted for Trump by huge margins. That tells you something. Right down the street, from where I live in Gloucester, Massachusetts, there was a house where they had not just one, but 2 Trump flags. They had to Take America Back and one of the original Let's Go Brandon flags. And then out in front of the house, they had a fully fund our public schools sign. And to me, like, that indicates that, one, I'm in the right place, but 2, that you know, like it gives us, there's an amazing opportunity there, and we really have to resist the urge to turn public education into a blue thing, because if that happens, it's over.
Okay. We're going to go on to the question and answer session now. We've got, if you raise your hands, we've got 2 people with microphones. We'll go with Dick Stamer.
Yes, hi. Thank you all so much. This is the best public education conference I have ever been to.
We're going to give ourselves a round of applause.
And since we're in a house of worship, and I'm a member here, this has great importance for me. There was one thing that wasn't mentioned, I don't think, and if it was, I apologize for missing it. But I see the 4 horsemen of apocalypse marching across Florida and the nation. The first 3 horsemen are greed, power, and control. And it pains me to say, as a former Methodist Sunday school teacher, that the 4th horseman is Christian nationalism. And I'm actually going to be at a conference this afternoon at the Venice UU regarding Christian nationalism with Amanda Tyler. But I just wonder if you all have any thoughts on that and its outsized influence on what's going on and destroying our public schools.
I highly recommend you read Catherine Stewart. It's Stewart. She wrote a book called The Power Worshippers. Florida is featured prominently, and she has a new one that is called Gods and Glory or something like that. But The Power Worshippers talks about the rise of Christian nationalism, and it connects it to Florida and its public education system. But yeah, we're definitely seeing there's every year there are laws. There's a thing called Project Blitz, which is to bring religion back into schools. There's an organization that's very well funded that wants to bring like Sunday school classes into schools, but they're starting by having it be like an out of school field trip. Yeah. And we have a law, we had a law that was passed that I think no one could disagree with, was that students should have unexcused absences if they had religious, I don't know what, the ceremonies or whatever to attend. And that law apparently was written by these people who want it to say that they should be able to leave campus and go take Sunday school class during the school day and then come back in, and that's all a way of bringing it in. We already have a law in the schools that says we have to have "In God We Trust" prominently displayed, because that is our state motto. And I'll say that when I'm done running for school board and someone asks me what my lasting legacy was, one of the things is that I got the policy in Florida to say, and that we will prominently display that in the form of the seal of the state of Florida, so that no one is confused as to why we have the statement up on the wall.
Shirley? Shirley Brown, former legislator and school board member. That seal is because we in Sarasota were getting ready to put up these signs, and I said to our staff, why are we paying for these signs? We've got the seal and it's right on there. So they went, oh, and they backed off and didn't do that. But I ran for the legislature in '92. The state was cutting funding and told Sarasota that we had to limit the amount of discretionary funds we could raise, and they sued us, or we sued them. We ended up losing the suit, and saying that the state can limit the amount of local funds, and I pushed and got legislation through to allow the voters to decide whether or not we kept that money that was in the trust account, which then led to the laws to allow us to have referendums for funding. But I was always told when I'd be in the legislature and we funded schools, we gave them more money, and I'd come back and the story was, no, you cut our funding. And I'm like, I don't understand this. And I'd sit down with the people and go over and over and over again. One of the things that they do is that $200 teacher pay they give, and they give you a little more every year. That's not new money every year. That's the same $200 million they put in the first year in order to, because it's a continuing payment that we have to make. So it's not a new $200 million we're getting every year. It's the same $200 million they gave us a few years ago. The other thing that I found that made a big difference, and it might make a big difference this year, and is that the unfunded liability from the Florida retirement system. And that is done separately from the budget for the school education, because even the people who were sitting on the Education Finance Committee in the legislature think, well, we gave you more money. Yes, you did, but over here in the, I'm trying to think of what committee that was, government committee, they increased the retirement funding amount that we have to put in. And I can't imagine that the unfunded liability didn't jump by a quarter. I mean, it's 38 million. I would imagine that the unfunded liability, because of the stocks and bonds, probably increased $5 to $10 million. And that might force them to increase the amount of the unfunded liability that the school districts have to pay. And the people on the one committee have no idea that this is going on over there. So that is something that you have to look at in addition to what they're funding on education. What are they funding if they're going to increase that amount of unfunded liability? Because that could wipe out and even be more than what they're giving us for the schools, for the districts this year. So that's something that you all need to look into, the unfunded liability rate, and if it went up.
Unfunded liability this year is about $25 per student. So it cuts the increase that the House says in their per pupil funding in half.
So they did increase it this year?
Yes, they did. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that my district will be $2.6 million in the hole. It's the cost of that. It is the rising cost of property values, or property insurance, and the rising cost of health care. In addition to the mandated teacher raises, we're not getting funded enough to do all of those things, and we're going to have to dip into our rainy day fund.
Deb? Oh, I'm sorry, this gentleman over here first.
Hi, I'm Lee Bryant. I'm the president of the Panelists Classroom Teachers Association. I was glad to make the drive down here.
Thank you for coming.
It was eye-opening in many, many ways. We're also going to be in a negative situation in Pinellas County. We're really, really going to be hurting. I actually have the number in Pinellas County of how much money goes to the scholarships. And in Pinellas County, it's $127 million going to the scholarships that are coming out of the budget. It is scary what's going on, but in addition to that, the attack on the teachers' unions is just devastating. When Senate Bill 256 passed and they eliminated the budget, the payroll deduction for teachers to have their dues come directly out of their paycheck, it devastated the teachers' unions, absolutely. And the rules that they put in place by raising the membership density to 60% is killing us. Just yesterday, I drove to Tallahassee to turn in showing of interest cards to try to call for an election to keep PCTA as the bargaining agent in Pinellas County. It's the second year in a row I've driven up there to turn in showing of interest cards, and PERC, the Public Employee Relations Commission, has still not called for our first election. Not even called for the first election, and I've already had to go up and try to get the second election started. PERC is supposed to be sending out envelopes for people to vote in secret to their teachers' addresses. They decided the other day, or unilaterally, last week to eliminate the stamps. Instead of it being pre-stamped, now any teacher that gets the envelope to vote to try to keep the union as the bargaining agent has to go out and buy a stamp just to send it back. And if we try to supply a stamp, that is election interference. Wow. They are doing everything they can. We're sitting at 44%. Getting to 60% is going to be nearly impossible. Every year we're going to have to keep this fight going until we can change it.
Hello. Okay, it's on. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm a local public school teacher here in Sarasota. I wanted to say thank you all to the panelists and event organizers so much for spending so much time on this. And just all of your work and all of your advocacy, like it really makes a difference. I know, sometimes after long hours in the classroom or grading, I wonder, like, is what I'm doing really making a difference? So if you've ever wondered that, I have to say you are, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
All the work
Very
you're
much
doing.
appreciated.
I did have a question. I am curious to know what you mean when you say that kids don't have civil rights at charter and private schools. If you could go into more details about that or even give some examples. I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, so this is another thing that is kind of confusing. When you hear people talking about civil rights, they're talking about the 14th Amendment. They're talking about the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And if we drew a little timeline of what's happened with public education in this country, you would see that it's a long story of progress where access to public education has consistently been expanded over time. So Brown versus Board of Education, it's African American students. IDEA, those are students with disabilities. Before the 1970s, schools could just turn them away. And if you were a family and you had a kid with Down syndrome or autism, you were on your own. And then over what's been most controversial over the last few decades is the push to expand civil rights to kids who are LGBTQ. And that's really what the fight is. So those civil rights are federal. They are enforced through the Department of Education. When Donald Trump announced that they were going to dismantle the Department of Education, it is not a coincidence that the first thing they did was take a hatchet to the Civil Rights Enforcement Division. So right now they're basically saying, parents of kids with special needs, we're not listening to your complaints anymore. You have a complaint that relates to race, too bad, we're not worrying about that anymore. Their big focus right now was on what they call gender ideology. So the first thing they did was they go after a high school in Denver where the kids organized and demanded a gender-neutral bathroom. Boom, they're under investigation now by the Department of Education. So that's their top issue. Then the other is what they would call anti-Semitism. And then finally, they are going after school districts all across the country that are in violation of their constantly shifting definition of DEI. Charter schools are public schools. They receive federal funding, right? And so students in those schools have enforceable civil rights. But it's when you move into the private system that is no longer the case. And it's why when you hear folks say that school choice is really the school's choice, it's because they don't have the same, they're not required to accept students with special needs or provide them with services. And so that's why this is all so concerning, that we're doing a couple things at once, and one is to just drastically scale back civil rights, period. And I think it's more and more apparent that the real target of all of this stuff is the 14th Amendment, to roll that back and to say, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. And then to really keep, to pour money into moving kids, I said off the books, but basically into private schools where they don't have the same civil rights. So I know that it is really complicated, but at the end of the day, it's actually, I think, really clear and really disturbing.
Well, and I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
RFK Jr. said it the other day that, autistic children are never going to write a poem, they're never going to do a whatever. I mean, that's all sort of part of that same getting rid of that IDEA. In Florida, when you, they have a voucher that's specific for children with special needs. It's called the Family Empowerment Scholarship for Children with Unique Abilities. And when a family member signs that, they basically sign away their rights to IDEA. They recognize that they are not, that the school does not need to provide them with that once they leave public school.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. You explicitly give up your civil rights to due process when you take a voucher.
But the sad thing is, I think a lot of people that are taking these vouchers don't realize this.
Correct.
I have some personal experience with a family member has a child in a private school and determined that the child has some learning disabilities, and they had to go outside of the school for all the analysis and so on. And now they have a plan, but they have no rights to. The school doesn't have to agree with what they're asking for. So.
And it's also an unfunded mandate in Florida that children take vouchers with disabilities, but the school districts are responsible for conducting the assessment that determines the level of funding that student needs to support them academically. So, since we're on unfunded mandates.
Okay. Heather?
I am on the Manatee County School Board, so hi. Thank you for fighting for the unions. I was a member of our union in Manatee County. I'm a former teacher. Thank you for being a teacher. I taught IB in a Title I school for 6 years. And so all of this, of course, is very near and dear to my heart. And my kids went to that same Title I school and graduated from there. There are so many questions I have about ways that we can help protect our kids. And so one of the things that I am struggling with is fighting for our kids while sitting on the dais and not being political, of course, because this is a nonpartisan position, and I try really hard at that. But how do we, any of us, whether we're teachers or union members or regular citizens, how do we keep the momentum going? I think people get tired of hearing from me. I know our legislators do. Sue and I were up there twice this year, and I met with Representative McFarland, who basically patted me on the head and said, no, we're not cutting your funding. And I really, really wanted to cry BS at her, but as I was sitting in her office, I thought that was inappropriate. And I know these kids. I know these students who are getting cut. I taught them. Their brothers and sisters are still at that school. I'm going to go see them next week. How do we let these kids know that we're supporting them? How do we keep their parents involved? Because I feel like there's only so much that we can do as individuals and trying to keep these groups going. We don't have one of these in Manatee. And I'm not in a position to launch it myself. How do we keep these things going? How do we expand them?
I think Zaire has the answer to that question.
She does.
Also, this is only my second panel, by the way, so I'm a bit nervous. Thank you. I think one thing that's worked for us is, like I mentioned before, as you mentioned before as well, keeping it local and starting local. Our data shows that school board wins are tangible goals, and when we are able to reap the benefits of our work that we put in canvassing and flipping school board elections and beating DeSantis-backed school board candidates, it motivates young people or people in general to continue voting up ballot, continue getting involved, not only at a local level, but on the statewide and national level. Again, also providing those tools and resources. It doesn't make people feel like they're left in the wind and that they have nothing to work with. SOS and Sea Alliance, we've partnered a lot, and we've done very well at holding our strategy sessions. And also, I think something that people overlook is having a balance within your workspace that doesn't always have to be so intense and involve politics. We also provide space for people to come in and just decompress or do their work. We hold community events that, again, have nothing to do with school board movement or the politics that are going on around us. And when they are not so overwhelmed by the ever-changing bills and policies, it keeps that energy pumping.
Thank you, Zaire. Anybody else have a comment?
I have something, I'm sorry, I always have something to say.
That's why we invited you.
One of the things when Heather and I, the last time we were up in Tallahassee, we were there with, in an organization we're in that involves Miami-Dade, and their chief financial officer was there, and he had just spent a day with the appropriations, the education appropriations staff, and he was showing them how much, you know, how much in debt Miami-Dade was going to be. You know, the bigger the budget, the more in debt they are. And the appropriations staff, these are nonpartisan staffers that have worked up in Tallahassee for a long time, but they do the work of the administration, right? They asked him, if we continue to increase at a 1% increase of funding, how long before you go bankrupt? And he thought 2 to 3 years.
And he's a very smart guy.
Yeah, he knows.
Julie.
So it is hair on fire right now.
Absolutely.
Julie?
Hi, okay, I agree with you, Jennifer. Our glasses are more than half full. We are going to pop that balloon. I love all of you so very much because I didn't want to come to this at all. I don't want to write my blog. I get so commitment phobic. Thank you for making me so happy to be here. I guess Rana helped me come because if she can come, I can come as well. So my question is, and it might be more geared towards Zaire, but I'd love to know what you all think about this. In Orlando, Florida, they just hired a consultant for $935,000 to get the people who send their kids to charter schools and private schools to go to the public schools. In Sarasota, I believe we can do that. I believe we can knock on doors. But do you feel that school boards should be paying consultants? Is it a gamble to get them to come back to the public schools? Thank you.
This question is for me?
Yeah, it's $1,000 per student.
Could I pass this question on to one of you?
Thanks, Zaire.
I think I might pass this question on to one of them. I feel like they may be more equipped to answer that, so I'm passing the baton.
It's a hard one to catch. Something that I would observe too is when you homeschool parents have the opportunities to buy classes from their local public school, their kids have to be allowed to play on sports teams, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe there needs to be laws about prohibiting that as part of an overall strategy of reinforcing the value of public schools. If it's so good that your kid is taking AP Spanish, why doesn't he just go to public school? I don't know, that's just me, but I'm sure Sue has a more sanguine approach.
So when our first book came out, A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door, we did millions of Zoom events. We would get together with just groups of parents and teachers, and somebody would always ask a question like that. It wasn't the consultant, it was, how can we do a better job of marketing our local public schools? And my heart would sink, because I would think, like Jeb Bush won. Right? Like we're all, like he gave a speech once where he said, there's chocolate milk, strawberry milk, there's every kind of milk you can imagine. Why can't we treat schools the same way? And to some extent, having to think about marketing your schools or hiring a consultant. But I feel like, what if we got better at expanding the conversation so you have all kinds of people in the community making the case for why your local public schools are so important. And so it's businesses, it's cultural organizations. And so it's not just the teachers, it's not just the teachers union, and it's not just the parents whose kids attend the schools right now, but there's a real sense that our community relies on this institution and needs for it to be strong. I personally, like, paying a consultant nearly $1 million makes my skin crawl, so I wouldn't be so keen on that.
Florida schools need to be better at telling their own story. We're not really good at that. And I think one of the things your book, the first book touched on, is that there's restrictions for marketing with the tax dollar for public schools, but there's no restrictions for these other schools. And there's no requirement that they be true. There's no truth in advertising for those schools either. But one of the things that I have heard is getting people into the schools to dispel the myths is part of it. If you listen to right-wing radio, I don't recommend it, but sometimes I do, it's almost all about how bad public schools are. So people, even in my own community, that raises $3 million on our little island for high school graduates for scholarships, we still have people who are like, oh, those are terrible, that's just, childcare.
For the litter boxes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to be fair, our Superintendent Connor has on many occasions, said that he's in favor of school choice, but he wants the public schools in Sarasota to be the first choice. Now, then on the other hand, we've got Bridget Ziegler, who, constantly, not from the dais necessarily, but is constantly out, with the blingy culture wars garbage. So, it's clearly something we're fighting here. I think there was a question back there, and then I will get you and you. Who's first? Okay, Theoni, sorry.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. It's extremely enlightening. I definitely want to thank Sue for bringing up the Jeb Bush's A++ plan from 1999. I've been talking about that for years, so thank you for continuing to highlight that. I also want to respond to Julie's question a little bit and answer a question that our friend from the Manatee County School Board had. I think we have tremendous opportunity in Sarasota and Manatee to highlight our graduates of public schools who have stayed in our communities and open businesses. If we can go to those people who are educated in our public schools in both of these counties, I can count in 1 minute a dozen businesses in both of those counties that have had high success, that have brought jobs to our communities. I think that is a positive message and a mission that we can get on. So just a response to both of those. But I do have a question I think a number of people on the panel can answer, and that's about attrition rates for families that choose the voucher. So they're taking, let's say, approximately $8,000 voucher and moving into a private school, and then they realize that A, maybe I gave up my student civil rights, or B, these do not have the resources that were sold to me, and now I want to bring my child back to the public school. So my question is, where does that money go? Does the money truly follow the student? So if I'm a parent who took the $8,000 and now in the second semester, do I have to give $4,000 of that back? I'm very curious about how that money is followed, who's tracking that money, and what that deficit or attrition rate looks like. I don't know if you can answer that. I would imagine, Norin, you've got some numbers on it. I'm curious about that because I can't answer that question when I'm asked the question myself. Thank you.
Yeah. The way the schools get funded is on counts. The public schools get funded on specific weeks, the kids who show up. If a child is, so the answer is they don't get all the money, they get the money 4 times a year. And if they transfer and if it is recognized, then the voucher part of that money will come back to the public schools, in theory. The family may have signed a contract saying that they were going to pay the full year, and they may be on the hook for the rest of the money. The bigger loss initially is that, the voucher is not a place in a school, it's like a hunting permit, right? You get the voucher, and now you have to go get your kid enrolled in a school that will actually accept them, that you can get them to. And so the first year of universal vouchers, there were huge numbers of kids, families who had applied for vouchers, could not find places, and so showed up for school on the first day back at their public school. And they were not funded in the public school. It took a year to get them funded in the public school, even though they could show they were there because they got the voucher. So there is a bill right now that is not the worst bill, that is meant to address that issue. But the same thing happens with charter schools. Because the counts are in October and whenever, March, February, charter schools often counsel kids to leave after the second count because it's before the state testing. So, and then there's no funding for that kid.
And the other part of that is that when these kids go off to the charter school or the public school and then they come back, I remember discussing this with Shirley Brown, when they come back into the public schools, they're behind. And so you've got a learning loss issue. I think we had a question. We have
Hi, my name's Kennedy. I'm actually a high school student. I go to Booker High School, which is a Title I school, and we have ACE programs, which are at risk of being cut. So I just want to ask you guys, how do you keep going every single day? I mean, the thing I've heard from across the room is that times are tough, things are tough, there's issues all across the board. So what's a quote that fires you up in the morning? What is a memory that you guys have done in your time organizing as public school advocates that actually gives you the energy to keep going every single day?
I'm just gonna add this to the answer that I gave for one of my previous questions that I got. In addition to keeping a balance where you have a space to decompress as well as a space to work, I think also keeping it fun, as simple as it sounds, it's a simple solution. And it, again, adds to that balance of making sure people aren't so overwhelmed with working in such intense waters. If that means playing music when you have people over. I say the space because we have a physical space downtown that we call C-Space. We play music in there all the time. We have fun. We have snacks, coffee, tea. And it's little things like that that make a big difference. To answer your question about a quote that keeps me going, I quote this a lot. It's, you've made it through 100% of your worst days. And if we've made it through what we've gone through, we have the strength, we have the capacity to keep going further.
If I could make a comment, Kennedy, if you want to know what keeps the people that support our schools moving, and there are days, just like everybody on this panel, where it's like, I can't do this anymore, you know, doing a presentation at a national conference and then following it in 2 or 3 weeks with a forum like this was maybe not our best move, but what keeps us motivated is people like you.
100%.
We come into your spaces, you teach us, you motivate us, and we get up and fight again. I think we had a question. Thank you for being so patient.
Like I said, I always have something to add. Mine is William Barber, Reverend William Barber. I paraphrase a quote he said, and that is that I might not be able to save public schools, but my kids will see me trying.
I really want to thank you. You have really inspired me. I've been trying to figure out how am I going to get engaged in light of what's going on in the world. And I started a charter school in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was, the Cincinnati Public School was opposed to it. But the School Facilities Commission for the school district sold me a building for $25,000 so I could start a recovery high school. This was a school for kids that were being expelled. It didn't matter whether you came from a wealthy school district or an inner city school. It did not matter. You came there because you were not going to go to school for the next 6 months because you were expelled for being in possession, which I believe was a good reason for a charter school. Unfortunately, I had to raise millions of dollars privately from foundations to fund it, to fund the mission. And after 7 years, a bunch of billionaires on the board, or millionaires, not billionaires, millionaires, decided that we weren't really making any money. It was a real challenge to just fund the education, the drug testing, the mental health services, the support of parents. I mean, it took a ton of money. So the board decided, well, we don't like this anymore. We need to do something. I said, okay, we need to partner with an agency, a mental health agency. But nobody was willing to do that. So 20 years later, that school, is going under because they hired a principal who had no credentials. They never paid into teacher retirement for teachers. They started their own it was a total sham. And I'm standing here today embarrassed that my name is associated with that school that went under after 21 years. But I was also the director of special education for another 15 years in 2 school districts in Illinois and in Ohio. And what's going to happen to those kids? Is Section 504 going to take care of them? Will that protect them? Because I don't know. I know IDEA, I came of age in 74. I started teaching when these kids were being brought into schools. I mean, we had to go out and identify them just to get them into the schools. So what's going to happen to those children? And is Section 504 going to protect them? Will they be guaranteed any kind of education under civil rights?
You do know that 504 is currently, there are 17 states, including the state of Florida. There's a lawsuit called Texas versus Becerra. Florida is also a party to that. And the goal of that lawsuit is to completely do away with Section 504.
See, the thing that's so obvious to me is this is so complicated, even for a person who's an educator, and I've been retired for 12 years, but think how difficult it is to mobilize people when we're bogged down in the culture wars. They don't really, I think one of the key points that's made here is that we really do need to promote what public education has meant for our country. What has it meant for our country? And what does it mean for our community, like this lady over here said? There are people that have graduated from public schools that need to speak up. So I just think this has been a great day. You've motivated me. I'm going to get involved.
Thank you so much. Christy?
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here. This is very informative. I do have a question, and I think it Oh, right here? Oh, better. Oh, okay, good. I'm a retired teacher, a year and a half, and I have a question, but I think it kind of brings a lot of things full circle here. Here it goes again. I wanted to ask, when did it happen that, and this is what I think is happening too at the national level, because we have a businessman that we want to make our government based on a business model. When did it happen that we wanted to base public education on a business model? We don't need to, we shouldn't even have to market public education. Tax dollars are for the public good, and tax dollars should be used for public education. Was it Jeb Bush when it happened where we felt that we have to convince people our schools are the best? This whole idea of marketing schools, making them like we have customers and we need to market the public education, because I don't remember that when I first started teaching. I don't remember feeling that we have to market, because our public taxes were supposed to go for public goods, not for private goods. That's a whole different system. Do you remember when it began?
So I know the answer because my co-author and podcast co-host is an education historian. And so anytime there's a question like that, you can turn to him and say, Jack, when did this start? And more importantly, how did it end? And because he's an academic, his answer will be very long. But really, we see this take off in the 90s. And what happens is, it's interesting how familiar it feels with what we're going through today. That there was this strong sense that, you know, the country had gone off the rails in some way. We'd gone through this period of stagflation, and people remember suddenly the price of oil went through the roof, and people were siphoning gas out of other people's cars. And so there was this real, sort of crisis of confidence in institutions, and public education was one of them. And there was a sense that they needed to be shaken up. And you really start to hear, the business community comes to the fore and says, what if we start running them like a business? And there's real, bipartisan enthusiasm for that. Charter schools come out of that. There's a lot involved in the charter movement, but that was a big part of it. Make school more like a product that parents can choose. And so, but what's interesting is, we now run whole states like businesses where you just keep cutting taxes, and, you invest less in schools. And the verdict is really in that it's been a complete failure, right? So it's amazing, not just that it took hold to our imagination, but that we can't get rid of it.
I think we have a couple more questions. One over, this lady in the black and white, and then the lady in the blue here.
Okay, I really just have a somewhat quick question. First of all, I so appreciate the keynotes and the panelists. It's been wonderful. But I also want to compliment the film at the beginning. It's really great. And I always find myself inadequate to the job of explaining to somebody who is uninitiated into this horror, just sort of all the component pieces. I think that the video did a great job of giving you all those component histories and, is it going to be available on the website? Is there a place where I'm going to be able to click and show somebody?
Absolutely. It will be on our website.
Great.
I think it's already on there, but no, we were holding off. Yeah, we didn't want to put it on until we previewed it here. You were here for the grand. This gentleman has a question.
I want to follow up on the uninitiated idea. On the surface, for parents, to have a voucher, send their kid wherever you could possibly go, seems like a pretty good idea. So what's the Vouchers 101 for Dummies bumper sticker, phrase, slogan, short explanation of what's wrong with the whole idea?
One of the things that Laura Hine is a Pinellas School Board member, and she was also up with us in Tallahassee, and what she likes to talk to the lawmakers about is, she said, in your mind you can think of, in Pinellas County or here in Sarasota, everyone can think of a couple of private schools that they think it would be great for my kid to go to those schools. And she says, you could probably name 5 schools just off the top of your head. And then she says to the lawmaker, but did you know that there's 437 voucher accepting schools in Pinellas? Or she has those numbers, and 65% of those are unaccredited. That's what we're sending them to. I think Josh Cowan, who is really a strong voice about vouchers, he calls them he calls them what are the bad loan?
Subprime.
He calls them subprime schools. Yeah. That's what's being offered to families, and most vouchers only fund part of the tuition, and so the toniest schools are still $25,000, $30,000 a year with the voucher beyond the reach of people, but that's, the other schools, tend to be unaccredited, and I've been pushing for a long time to get a law that says you could, so we're a school choice state, that vouchers can only be accepted at high schools that are accredited, because then the diploma has a value, that, and when I present that even to Republican lawmakers, they're shocked that there's unaccredited high schools that kids are, they don't know. They don't know.
What that mean? What does it mean to be unaccredited?
So to go, what does it mean? There's an usually all public schools have to be accredited. There's an accreditation process that you go through that says that you are teaching to a certain standard, that you're providing education to a certain national standard. And so an unaccredited school has no proof that it is taught to that standard. So the diploma kids get from that, like sometimes the military may not accept it as a high school diploma because it's not an accredited educational facility.
Great. Well, that is the end of our panel, and thank you so much. This is wonderful. So just this transition, I just want to tell you a little bit about Sarasota in terms of vouchers. It's some research I just finished doing. So in Sarasota County, we have, I think it's something like 49 schools in the traditional school district. Now, when I looked up the latest number of the voucher-supported schools, it's now 51. So we have more of these voucher schools than we have the private schools. And that went up from, it used to vacillate between about 32 and 38 before the universal, so it was a big jump over this past year. Now the thing about it, so you say, well, how could it be 51? Because even though the numbers are high, it's not that high. Well, some of these have 5 students, 10 students. One of them has 1 student. It's still on the books. People who live in Sarasota probably remember the big scandal of the minister who was sexually abusing students at the private school. Well, that's still listed with 1 student. So even though he's in jail for life, in prison for the rest of his life, that school still is receiving a voucher for 1 student. But it just shows this whole thing about there's like no accountability, no regulations. And on the accreditation, hardly any of them in Sarasota are accredited, or if they are, it's by some sort of like scammy classical type accreditation, which I don't think has much standing. Some of the Catholic schools are, we have a number of those, and that has increased somewhat. But yeah, so Sarasota, small county, rather wealthy county, but we're still being super, super hurt by vouchers. Yeah. Anyway, so in terms of what happens next, I know some people are leaving at this point, and many, though, are staying, and we're going to be across the way in the art gallery. It's just directly across from where we are. The people who ordered food, it's there. It's to the left when you walk in. And we ordered some extras, so if you would like to, we were charging $15 for the lunch. If you'd like to do that's fine. Now, some of you, I know there was a big rush at one point with registration, and you didn't choose the different topics. The way we're arranging it, we have 4 tables. When you go in, you'll see 4 tables. And they have different topics. So while we're eating lunch, we're going to be talking about an issue, and we're going to be developing kind of bullet points of what's important, perhaps turning them into messaging. Then we're going to have a report back from each table. Then Xander from the Sea Alliance is going to be talking about the school board project in more depth. You heard a little bit about that. And then we're going to put together the information that we worked on for to add or to assist with good school board campaigns. So that's kind of the plan for the day, and we'll end at 3 o'clock then. So use this time, visit the restroom, but then we're not going to waste too much time. We're going to get pretty much to work. So get over there as quickly as possible. So again, thank you all for coming. It's been, I think I know a lot of this stuff, but I learned so much today. I really did. So, from talking to people and from hearing the comments, I think everyone shares my opinion. Thank you so much. Oh, there's one thing I should have mentioned. I'm sorry. I was going to actually go over the topical tables so you can think about it and who's leading it. So one is vouchers and school budgets, and Sue Woltanski and Norin Dollard will be leading that. The next one is protecting IEPs, 504s, Title I schools, civil rights, budget cuts like the advanced programs. And Maureen Keyes and myself will be leading that. Then we have one on supporting teachers, and Theone Siblis will be leading that. Then supporting and advocating for students, and that'll be Lisa, Xander, Jennifer, Berkshire. And this may be news for you folks too. I don't know whether you were told this. So as I said then, we're hoping to turn this into like an action plan for school boards. Okay.
You want to wait and get
Thanks.
a picture taken?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Can you come? No, he'll take.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
He's going to take it, but you can
Yeah,
take
fine.
one.
That'd be
With your
good.
camera and my camera.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just
Just one correction. One correction on the supporting teachers table. Jennifer Berkshire is going to be part of that table. I'm saying that because that might change.
People will flee the teacher table.
No, the opposite. They'll
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was, I always, every time I'm about to do one of those
Nice to
things,
meet you.
I
I met
if only
Sue
Toastmasters
at the
wasn't on
MPE.
Tuesdays.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't met Sue. Yeah. Yep. I was with SOS along with Julie. We were the only two with Sea Alliance. Yeah, it was very hectic. We were in work mode. We weren't in like networking mode. But next year when we go, we're gonna try to be a little bit more engaged. We were so focused on the panel and presentation and video that we didn't really get to enjoy.
To MPE?
Yeah.
They don't need a lot of time for networking.
Yeah.
The Alliance or the Sea Alliance?
Sea Alliance.
Oh.
Yeah, SEE, so
Yeah.
it's pretty
Oh,
good.
okay.
Some people think it's sea
Yeah.
or like,
Well, I thought
like the ocean.
I just assumed it was the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sea Alliance. Yep. Nice meeting you guys.
I thought that you did very well considering that.
Thank you. I was
And it was
so
very fun to
nervous.
just, like,
My
give you
first
a
panel was at the conference. That was also, I was asked like the night before, and I was like, okay, I think I can do this.